so scared and so alone in your hell. And if you plunge into the river, you'll drown the shame and halt the struggle onward. That's racked with twisted dreams, distorted scenes of buried memory that can't break free. Do you seek a refuge in the river where the underwater cushions all the blows from the demon locked inside? You don't have to decide to keep him hidden or to fight him on dry ground.
There are over 28 million abused women in the United States. Every 18 seconds, a woman is beaten.
Oh, hi. Responsibility in the face of violence against women. 3 to 4 million women are assaulted every year. Every 15 seconds, a woman is beaten. A battered woman is killed every 17 days in Massachusetts. And 30% of female homicides are killed by their husbands and boyfriends. My name is Rosie McMahon. This is Dead Air Live. Tonight's show is dealing with the issue of violence against women. Our guests this evening are Lana Davis, who is the shelter coordinator of Respond, Mary Cunningham, who is the police officer on the domestic violence unit for the Somerville Police Department, and Kate Cloud, who is the director of Respond. Thank you for joining us. To open the show, I guess I will direct my question to you, Lana. When we talk about battering, I mentioned some of the statistics at the beginning of the show, but what, locally, if you could speak first, is the extent and the scope of battering against women?
Okay, battering is very prevalent in Somerville and locally in the state of Massachusetts. At Respond, in the past year, we have handled over 2,000 hotline calls. We've serviced about, I'd say, 100 women in our shelter. Although we have a small shelter, it's always full. So we never go without having a full shelter.
Does that mean then, I mean, you mentioning how much, how full
women?
it is all the time, does that mean that there's a waiting list?
We don't go by a waiting list. It's a first come, first serve. And we work with the network within Boston. So every morning we have an update on what shelters have space, and we will refer women. But we don't, have a waiting list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you say you are the shelter coordinator, what involvement do you have with the women that you see?
Well, what that means actually is when a woman comes in, we'll assess what she needs to do. If she wants shelter, then we'll help her find safe shelter. If she's from Somerville, sometimes it's not best for her to be in our shelter because she needs to find a safe place. And we wouldn't want her to be in our shelter and feel isolated, that every time she went to the store that she would have to look over her shoulder. So we might have to refer her out to another city. If she is safe in Somerville and we have space, then she'll come in. We'll help her get what she needs, the emergency types of things, money, help her obtain welfare benefits, clothing. Sometimes women will come into the shelter with nothing. So we literally provide blankets, excuse me, towels, linens, clothing for her and her children. If her child needs to be transferred into the school system, we'll help them do that.
You mentioned children, so are, like, in terms of like the kind of women that are coming to the shelter, do most of them have children?
I wouldn't say most of them. We'll service single women as well as women with children. Because Respond has a fairly small shelter, be really in the best interest to take a lot of children. But we do, take children as well, any age. There's usually a cutoff of boys up to age 14. We need to assess it case by case for boy children.
How long has Respond been in existence?
15 years. I'm not going to say the exact date because
that's okay.
I'm always quoted wrong, but about 15 years. Started out as a safe home network and hotline. Women in the Somerville community got together and realized the need for this kind of service, and within the last 15 years we've really expanded into a shelter program and hotline, as well as we have a very large counseling component, support groups, outreach, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about it later, all the different things.
Yeah, all the different components. But when it first started, it was basically, so, as you're saying, women sort of recognizing the need for a place to go to when they couldn't be safe in their homes.
Right. Before any battered women movement started, battered women were living in mental institutions because their husbands would admit them, they're crazy, they're this and that. So this is where the battered women were 15, 20 years ago before the movement started.
Okay. And the longer that Respond has been around, do you find that you're servicing more women each year?
Definitely. The hotline, like I said, over 2,000 phone calls. We service, as we increase our services, we always have more women going in. So we started out with one support group, now we have 6. And we could have 7, although we're making, because of the budget cuts, et cetera, we're losing staff. Right. Okay. But we definitely have more women coming in every year.
Okay. And why do you think more women are coming in? Like the level of violence is increasing, or what do you attribute that to?
Well, I think the level of violence is increasing. I also think that publicity, shows like this, gets the word out. People know that they have options. I think before, women might not have known what their options are. That they don't have to be in a violent relationship, that there are other ways to live, that they can get out, and how to do that. So I think it's both. I think violence in our society in general is increasing, and also in the home.
When you mentioned sort of women realizing that there's other ways to live, let's talk a little bit more about the kind of woman. And I guess in general, when we talk about this violence, we are speaking in general about women in abusive relationships, be they short-term or long-term, with men who are assaulting them.
Right.
Okay. Let's talk about the woman who is in this situation.
Okay. Well, one of the myths, I guess, is that the battered woman is a minority woman who's not educated, who's poor, who lives in the ghetto. And that's just not true. Battering cuts across all lines, racial, religion, class, everything. I think you probably see more low-income women in the shelters because rich women can go to hotels, or can get out of the state quicker and go to see family in California. So it's a lot more accessible. They have more resources. But I guess I'm a little unclear on the question.
I guess I wanted you to talk a little bit about the kinds of women that people think of a lot, involve themselves in abusive relationships, and
okay. Well, all kinds of, any kind of, it could be in an abusive relationship. You hear women say, well, that would never happen to me. And I believe that a lot of people have preconceived attitudes.
Oops, your mic fell down. Yeah, clip it.
A lot of people have preconceived attitudes about battering, and that it would never happen to them. But I don't think that's true. I don't think anybody thinks that they're going to be a battered woman, and it's a hard relationship to get out of. A lot of people ask, why do battered women stay?
Yeah, I guess that. Yeah, are there things about a particular woman or a group, that are going to make them more likely? without sort of pointing the finger at them
Right.
and saying, well, what's wrong with these women? I don't
Right.
want to say that, but what is going to cause somebody to stay in an abusive relationship?
Okay.
It's a big question,
It
I
is a
know.
big question. I think in general, women tend to be, the biggest fault that a woman has is that she's a professional caretaker. And with this characteristic or this quality, she thinks that she can help somebody else. Batterers tend to be extremely needy people that proclaim to need this woman so badly. And when he is violent or he screws up somehow, he's apologetic and sorry and don't leave me because I really need you and I need help. And this can be a real catch for some women. So you're talking about, I guess the biggest thing is that women are caretakers. And they're very forgiving and they give so much to other people instead of keeping the focus on themselves. So women with low self-esteem, women that have been abused as children, and I don't want to limit it to just that because it can happen to any woman.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that by saying, if we describe a certain kind of woman, to say that doesn't mean that it can't happen,
Right.
because that's denying that it can happen to you is
Right.
a mistake.
Right.
Okay. Did you want to say something?
I just wanted to add that I think one of the things that we need to remember is basic fear. That if he is threatening to kill her if she leaves him, or to kill her child, or to kill her mother, or something like that, or this is what I did to you now, but if you leave me, just wait till what I do to you. Then she thinks twice about that, And I think we always have to remember that fear can overwhelm a woman and paralyze her, so that she can't.
But you know what, I imagine, as you say that, I understand that, but I also hear somebody saying, well, somebody threatening to do that and then doing that is another thing. Like,
There's a statistic nationally of 70% of women who leave an abusive relationship and are found are beaten to the extent that they need medical attention. And that's a huge statistic, to think that 70% of women who leave, because if you think of battering in terms of control and power, which is what it's all about, the biggest threat to a batterer is that a woman leaves the relationship. And ultimately she knows that. So there really needs to be a safe way to get out, and to, fear can be immobilizing.
so even though, it is valid for someone to feel afraid if somebody's saying, I will do this to you if you make any attempt to change the situation, there's also real evidence that points to the fact that, like you're saying, 70% of the women are found.
And I think if I can add to that, that what happens in these relationships is that the violence escalates. So in the beginning, if they've promised, I'm going to smack you, eventually the smack comes. So if now it's gotten to the point where the violence is so severe and it's come to, if you leave me, I'll kill you, no one else will have you, no one will help you, they pretty much are in the frame of mind that, well, he's gone this far, yeah, he will do that.
He's delivered on his
She
other
will do that.
promises.
That's right.
And I can see what you mentioned about women a lot of times being the caretaker can be problematic, because, we're not talking, women are involved with these men whom they care about, whom they love, who they feel love them. And that can be, it's a paradox, but it's also very real in a lot of these relationships. I believe we've run out of time for our first segment, but we're going to go to a tape that was produced by Respond, and
it was made by battered women for other battered women.
made by battered women for other battered women. Okay, and we're going to see just a portion of that. There's the tape, its whole length is how long, like 30
About
minutes?
20 minutes.
20 minutes, so we're only going to see about 7 minutes, and then we'll come back to the studio and we'll talk more with Mary about the police involvement and more with Kate about Respond. So let's go to the tape.
Respond in Somerville, Massachusetts, is a shelter and support program for battered women and their dependent children.
Respond offers a 24-hour crisis line. In addition, we have legal advocacy, whereby a counselor or advocate can escort a woman to court and to try to get legal relief for her situation. We help women get restraining orders, child support orders, or whatever they may require. We also offer individual counseling. We have support groups. We find that support groups are probably, one of the more significant programs that we have, that women find strength and get strength from each other by sharing experiences and giving and getting support from each other. We have the shelter program itself. We have a separate residence, and that can house up to 6-8 people at a time. We also have an extensive community outreach program, which is another important part of the program.
What happens when a woman first calls respond?
Well, that initial call is comes in on our crisis hotline, and we get some information. We're doing assessment when she makes that first phone call, and we encourage her to come in. That's the focus of that first phone call, is to get her in here so that we can talk with her and find out what her needs are, and then start working with her on an ongoing basis.
So what could a woman expect when she comes in?
When she comes in, one of the counselors sits down and talks with her and finds out what her needs are. Sometimes that involves housing for her and her children. Sometimes it does not. If she has a safe place to stay, either with relatives or with friends, we may do some individual counseling with her. We may invite her to join a support group, and sometimes it's both. And then whatever else is going on, if she needs to look for a job or find daycare for her children, apply for welfare, we assess all of those things and try to provide her some help.
And we're located at 1 Summer Street. You'll see the big, do you know what we look like, the building here? Okay. It's a big old red church building, and there's a sign on the lawn that says Multi-Service Center. Okay, if you get lost, just give us a call back. I'll try to help you out again. All right. Bye.
I hear you call from your river, so I'll try and find you on the other shore. Though each our travels chart a separate course, and they started from the very same source.
I think the first time that I realized that the first time that I had been abused was when I found out that I was pregnant, and I was about 2 months pregnant, and I came home and I told my husband, and he threw a dozen eggs at me, one by one, which, I'm laughing now because I'm nervous, but it was really horrible.
What finally made me leave was I was 5 months pregnant with his son, his child, and I couldn't take it anymore, It was, the last time he picked me up was the worst.
So we had this dream where if we moved to Boston, we could get a fresh start and things would be better. And they only got worse. I literally got beaten across the country in the car, and at one point had stopped, and I got hit in the head with a shoe, and some veins burst in my head, and I was 5 months pregnant at the time.
The last time he beat me up, almost everything I owned went out the window of an 8th floor apartment, He always went after my glasses too. That was the first thing. He knows I'm helpless without them,
Did the violence get worse as time went on?
Oh yeah, definitely progressed. It started with just the slap, and it wound up with him trying to kill me the last time. He was strangling me, and he punched me until I was unconscious in the face. And I just came out of that, and that's enough. I got tired of looking in the mirror and seeing the bruises.
I felt the emotional abuse was devastating. It was, I felt like I was going out of my mind. And he encouraged it. It's like he enjoyed doing it. And I believed it.
He would say things to me that I couldn't even comprehend anyone saying, especially to someone that they loved. It just was the foulest of foul, disgusting things. He would withhold affection.
I felt worthless. I felt like I was going out of my mind. I had a really low self-esteem, a low image of myself.
And I thought about leaving every minute, you know, every minute when I wasn't, but I never vocalized it. But it was like it's like this conversation, perpetual conversation in my mind about how terrible it was. But I can't understand it, but it was easier to think of like dying, you know, like maybe I'll get hit by a car or something, or maybe he will, you know, anything, you know, rather than be able to say to him, this is just fucked up and I can't take this anymore. To be able to say, you're wrong, this is not right, I don't deserve this shit, you know.
Very often the woman doesn't have any options. When she has choices and she's aware of those choices, she's more likely to leave. But if a woman is not aware of her choices, she may think she has to stay because of the children, or she may have to stay because she can't get a job, that she doesn't know how she would make it out there without his financial support, or sometimes without his emotional support. When she starts to realize that she can make it and she has some choices, she's more likely to opt to leave.
Why did you stay in that situation for as long as you did?
Hope that he would change, that things would get better, that this violent situation, this instance would be the last time, you know. Hope springs eternal, you know.
In the face of violence against women. My name is Rosie. Our guests are Lana Davis, shelter coordinator, Mary Cunningham, who is a police officer with the Somerville Police Department, and Kate Cloud, who is the director of Respond. We just saw a tape that was produced by Respond, profiling some women who have themselves been in abusive relationships, who have been assaulted. And I guess I'd like to speak with you some more and then turn some questions to both Mary and Kate. When we talk about abuse, what do we mean? How do we define abuse?
That's a good question. I think that many people have their own definitions of what abuse is, women and men included. When we talk about abuse at Respond, we don't talk about broken bones and black and blues, although that is abusive. But it ranges from physical abuse to emotional abuse and sexual abuse. We work with all three. Physical abuse can encompass isolation, harassment, being followed by your boyfriend or your husband, slapping, punching, use of weapons, threats. And emotional abuse is it's like a package deal. Wherever there's physical abuse in a relationship, there will always be emotional abuse. And the emotional abuse is degradation and humiliation and calling names and real jealous behavior, possessive behavior, and sexual abuse, including rape, married or not married, coercion, to do any kind of sexual act that a woman's not willing to do, names about her body, calling her names about her body. So it's many things. And, you know, I've talked to many women on the phone who'll say, well, I'm not battered, I've never had a black eye. Or I'm not battered, but, you know, he wants to control me all the time, and, you know, he did push me once and he pulled my hair once. The thing to remember is that abuse is progressive. I think we talked about that. And it usually starts out with the controlling behaviors of jealousy or being possessive. And then when that doesn't work anymore, then it'll escalate into name calling, in isolation.
What does, I guess, a question I have or that I've heard is, what does the man in the relationship get out of this? What, you know, I asked you before to sort of give a profile of the person who's being abused, but what is the person who is battering the woman he's involved with? And though I guess I just want to mention that in most of this talk we're talking about male-female heterosexual relationships, but it also is something that occurs in lesbian relationships too. And I guess that, you know, your point about it being an issue of power and control, that can be something that occurs in any relationship that people have. So I just want to mention that. But you know, what is the
It's
person
hard
who's
to
doing this?
understand. Unfortunately, because I've worked with abuse and battering for so long, I can almost, you know, get this profile down, but it's an irrational way of thinking. So many women can't understand it, and they stay in the relationship trying to understand, trying to fix it.
It doesn't make sense, therefore there's some way I can change it.
It doesn't make sense. It's irrational thinking. It's about control and power, and like I said earlier, batterers are emotionally dependent and very needy. And by making another person feel miserable, in some sense, gives them a sense of power, although it doesn't really ever work, and that's why it escalates. And so they'll try the next source of power, which might be physical.
Is there a correlation? You mentioned a little bit about women who are in abusive relationships. It's found that they, in their past, maybe as a child, have themselves been abused. Would the same thing also be true for the batterer in the relationship?
You know, that does happen. We try not to focus on that too much, because one thing about battering is that it's a choice. And you can see that it's a choice because most men abuse women in the privacy of their own homes and do not do it in public and do not do it in front of other people. Which can tell you right there that they have a choice when they're going to be abusive and when they're not. Most women believe that he lost control, he couldn't help himself. And a man might also use that as an excuse. As far as children witnessing violence, it definitely affects them in their development as they grow up, and some men who have witnessed violence in their homes will choose to be violent also. But again, it's an excuse. They're adults now, and they need to, you know, change that.
Yeah. I'd like to turn the conversation to you, Mary. If you could just start off. I gave some national statistics in the opening of the show, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about Somerville, seeing as the show is based in Somerville and Respond is based in Somerville.
Okay, I can tell you that currently we have 241 active restraining orders. That's as of today. We probably have, for the year, have handled, I'd say, 3 to 4 times that amount. So the volume is pretty incredible. There have been 91 arrests this year so far, which means that somebody's being arrested strictly for violation of a restraining order just about every 3 to 4 days, probably coupled with additional charges of assault or whatever they may be. And those statistics also don't include the power the police have now to arrest with probable cause that an assault and battery hasn't occurred without a restraining order in effect. So I'm sure if we can start gathering those statistics, that we'll see that there's a lot more family violence going on here in the city than we know by looking at restraining order situations. One of the things that I'd like to make clear is that Lorna's definition of abuse doesn't quite match the legal definition of abuse in terms of getting a restraining order. Emotional abuse would not be considered criteria for getting a restraining order. The criteria would have to be threats of physical abuse or forced sexual relations. However, there are other things that do go on, and I would urge people, even though they may not qualify for a restraining order, to contact the domestic violence unit, and there are probably complaints we can seek for other things.
So give me
complaints.
like what happens? Somebody calls up and they tell you that they're not only being threatened, but that they are being physically abused. What does the domestic violence unit do?
We would assist them basically in getting a restraining order. If there were additional complaints to be sought, we'd help them in getting those complaints. Depending on the severity of the crime, what's happened, sometimes a warrant's obtained. And if the domestic violence unit is not available, which a lot of times we're there for referrals and if people have questions during the day, and we do handle a lot of cases during the day, but a lot of abuse goes on in the evening hours, in early morning hours. And it's important for people to know that you can get a restraining order 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the way to do it is to call the police department. The courts do not have to be open. We have an emergency on-call judge. We call him, we explain the circumstances, and you can get an order immediately.
And you're saying, okay, you can get an order immediately. So somebody says, I don't want to call the police, you know, what are the police going to do? I mean, you're sort of stating that they can do something.
Yes.
Okay.
They can do plenty, and when they talk about the effectiveness of restraining orders, it is only a piece of paper, it's not a bulletproof vest. But I think what it does do is it empowers the woman to have a little bit more control over what's going on.
Yeah.
And it also lets the batterer know that this is criminal activity, and you're going to be held accountable for it now. You're going to be brought to court, you're going to go to jail. So I think that's important, that message get out there. It's not just a family matter anymore, it's a crime.
Yeah. And that way of thinking about it is different than the way it's been thought of in the past. And the police as a whole department have been, just from talking to you before, sensitized about this issue. Not just the domestic.
Well, and the police have been empowered. The legislature and the public has cried out. The legislature has enabled the police department through enacting laws. They've given them the powers of arrest, so they finally can do something about it. And the only thing I'd like to add in that is with all the newcomers in the city, there's been a problem with language barriers and things like that, and people that aren't familiar with the court system. They don't have to live under these conditions either. We do have interpreting services. We can get them to court, we can get them a restraining order, and we'll have somebody read the defendant or the abuser that order in their language so that it's quite clear that if they violate the order, they're going to suffer the same consequences. So.
Right. Could you explain just real simply what a restraining order is and what it does?
Okay, it can be obtained at either district court or probate court or superior court. Originally, the order is given as a 5-day temporary order, and we have to serve the defendant, and he's allowed to come before the judge on that 5th day and tell his side of the story if he chooses to, or he doesn't have to show up, and then generally the order is extended for about a year. The things that the order can give are an order to refrain from abuse, an order to vacate the household, and they can also order that the petitioner for the order be given custody of the minor children, temporary custody. There are many things that can be done in an order specifically, which is why if anybody has any questions, they can either contact our unit or go through a victim witness advocate at the courthouse, because other things can be done if the person that's being battered chooses to go to another location. Their address can be impounded so that the batterer does not know where they're at. Other conditions can be written in, that they remain away from where they're employed, that they remain away from wherever they may be, basically, which gives the police department the right of arrest no matter where they may be.
And how is that different than, what were you calling, something complaint?
Different than
a restraining order, if somebody is in a situation where they're feeling like they're being abused or that they're going to be, the restraining order is the path they should take.
The restraining order is the path, but you do have to meet those criteria, and then also you have to be former household member, married, formerly married, blood relative, or you have to have a child in common. So somebody may be in an abusive relationship who is not a blood relative or has never been a household member, but what's going on and what's happening to them is still a crime, so we'd assist them in seeking complaints, criminal complaints.
Criminal complaints. Okay, so for situations where it's a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship,
right, exactly.
You would advise people to pursue the criminal complaint. That's what I was trying to ask. Okay, you had mentioned the legislator, and I was just thinking in this segment we have a few minutes before the next tape, which is going to be a tape. It's produced, it's an HBO special, and Lee Grant is involved with it. But if you could just mention the piece of legislature, and then when we come back we can talk more about what's going on with that, and then focus more on responding what its needs are now.
Okay.
So
there is some legislation under consideration right now. I believe it's in the Judiciary Committee of the Massachusetts Legislature, called the Tucker-Amick Amendment, and that's an amendment to Chapter 209A, which is the Abuse Prevention Act in Massachusetts, which is a very important act. This amendment has a number of important provisions as well, and I don't know how much time we have to get into it, but it does provide, for instance, for a woman being notified when the abuser is let out on bail. It also provides for certain kinds of mandatory arrest in violation of a restraining order. And there are some elements of it that are somewhat controversial, so we're watching it, we're looking at it. It's changing all the time. It's 27 pages long.
Okay.
So,
All right, and maybe something you said about the bail, I think when I come back I'd like to talk about that. So why don't we go to this tape, and when we come back I'll speak with all my guests. Thank you.
Temporary shelters have meant the difference between life and death for thousands of women and children. A woman who needs to escape a violent home can't go to friends or family because she's usually followed there. Most of the time her husband controls the money, so she literally leaves the house with her children and the clothes on her back. Unfortunately, most shelters can keep her for only a month or less, leaving her the choice between homelessness or returning to her abuser. Permanent housing is urgently needed.
He knows where we are. He has worked as we call it a bouncer, I guess, and it's, as you know, just down the road somewhere. So he could be in anyone's car.
Where we are, okay. You know that it's secret, that you're not to tell anyone where we are. Tell them how to get here in any way, shape, or form, no matter who it is or what they say.
We had been separated since April, and he continued to harass us and come around. And it got to the point where he was coming over and beating me up at least twice a week. And I was in the process of trying to look for a job and take care of her. And the last time he abused me, it was in front of her. Something snapped in my head, and it was like, no, I can't stay here. The following day, I went and filed for a protective order. And he's not her father. We were never married. And he took her from the daycare. And nothing was done about it. About 2 or 3 days after we got here, she started acting what I thought was mean, yelling at the kids and stuff. And I found out through my counselor that that was good. She was coming out of a shell, getting her feeling back, her power back, who she was.
Was he abusing her too?
She said that he's kicked her, he's spanked her with sticks, he's hit her with sticks, he's thrown food on her. And this is a man that she called Daddy. And she has nightmares, and she doesn't think Santa Claus is going to come see her this year, but he is.
What did you find here at the shelter? What was the kind of help that you got her?
That I wasn't okay. The mental condition of myself and my daughter was something it didn't happen overnight, and so by the time I got here, I was bad off. During group, I was sharing this with the lady that does volunteer work from Aware, and she looked at me and she said, "You're in shock." And it was like it had a title then. I knew what was wrong with me. She said that it's called post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's what Vietnam veterans suffer from.
I was thinking
the
that.
flashbacks.
Yeah.
The
That you've been a prisoner and being brainwashed and
exactly.
Yeah.
Inability to think. I was not able to have control in my life. I know I can do it again now. I know that I don't have to depend on anybody. I didn't depend on anybody from the time I had her until the time I met him. It was me, and I did good. And I can do good again.
What was the situation that you got out of to come here?
My husband didn't believe his kids were his. I just, wanted to know who the father was. And
How could he think that the children weren't his?
we had sexual problems.
What were they? Was he rough with you?
He used to send me out to the streets sometimes and pick up guys and said that it was because I wanted it. So he always accused me of, you know, of having lovers, and this last time that I left him, he told me I was gonna have to do what he said when he said, and I was gonna have to take on a lover.
Why?
He felt like he wasn't satisfying me sexually.
Was he? Was he impotent?
No, he wasn't.
Well, what kind of game was that?
At the end, I didn't even ever want to have sex with him because I was afraid, you know, he'd send me out to the street, you know, that night or something. He'd get excited or something. He'd want me to go out there, and he said it was because of me.
It turned him on?
Yes.
Mama, tell my shoe.
Do you have any money?
I would. I've been supporting him, actually.
So what kind of work were you doing?
Accounting clerk.
So you've been the one who's bringing in the money for the family?
Yes.
You know, with most of the women who I've met, they're the ones who are bringing in the money, and yet the man is the one who gives them the orders and takes the money.
I used to give him my whole check. I wasn't even on the checking account.
What made you do whatever he said?
I was scared of him. I was scared of him from the beginning. I only knew him 2 months, and I was scared of him because he threatened me with knives before and threatened to kill my son.
So what are you going to do? What's your plan?
Well, I'm back to work now and got protective orders against my husband. And
you go to work from here?
Yes. Right now I feel kind of safe.
Responsibility in the face of violence against women. I'm your host, Rosie McMahon, and we're talking with Lana Davis, Mary Cunningham, and Kate Cloud. The tape, I just was thinking something when we were watching the tape. You had mentioned sort of abuse crossing all boundaries. You didn't mention age. Is there a broad age range of this happening?
I would say that it happens in... Whoops. I keep losing my microphone here. I would say it happens in all age ranges. Typically at Respond, we tend to see a lot of younger women in their 20s and 30s.
Okay. And now to you, Kate. When you were talking about the Tucker-Amick legislation, which I don't want to spend too much time on, you had mentioned just a little bit about the whole the issue of bail. And I guess I'm wondering if somebody is arrested and taken to jail, maybe Mary, you could answer this. What happens? I mean, can they get out on bail, and then what does that mean, and what does the police department do if that happens?
They do have the right to bail. If it was a straight violation of a restraining order, then they'd probably be out on $10 bail because they do have the right to bail. We don't have any mandatory anything that says that we're mandated to notify the person, but generally we do that he has been bailed because it's technically not the police department that bails them, it's the bail commissioner, although we can have some input. So if it is a case where there was an assault and battery or there was some kind of physical harm, we can request a higher bail, but everybody does have the right to bail even in these cases, so the best we can do is keep the victim informed.
Of when, yeah. Okay, and I guess you're sort of mentioning sort of the difference between the police department and the legal system. So my question to you, before we talk some more about Respond, I mean, how important do you view the legal system in all of this? And is it, right now, is it presently supportive or?
I think it's very important, and I think what's going on is pretty important. I think it's, people have to, we can only act upon what we
are able to act upon, and our hands have been tied, and it's only through law changes recently that we've been empowered, because we come into the same situation where we can only do what we're legally allowed to do. So it's important that people speak out.
And you can only do what you know about, too. If people don't call the police department.
That's right. That's the other thing, that it's important for people to know that if there's a woman screaming next door and if they're hearing fighting going on, it's not a family matter. What's going on behind those closed doors is a crime. And it shouldn't wait until the ambulance has to come and the police car has to come and the fire rescue truck has to come. Call the police department. You don't have to identify yourself. It's difficult to be neighborly with these people, or you may feel that, you know, it's not your affair and I have to live upstairs and I'm not going to get involved, but there isn't even a need to identify yourself. The last murder and attempted murder that we had in this city that were domestic violence cases, the police were never called to these households. So if the person that's the victim is so placed in so much fear that they're not going to make the call themselves, or their family members don't know what's going on, the only people that generally do are the people next door, upstairs, downstairs. Pick up the phone and call the police.
Okay. It's important to know that many women, when they are to reach for help, I think I've heard over 100,000 times that he ripped the phone out of the wall. So that communication is cut off right there. So she's not able to call most of the time. So if you do hear someone screaming, then call the police.
Okay. So back to Respond, if you could just run down, Lana had mentioned at the beginning the services that they provide. If you could run down the list of services.
Let me just recap them. We have a 24-hour crisis hotline. We provide emergency shelter. We also have a small amount of transitional housing. It's longer-term housing for women who can't immediately find permanent housing. We do individual counseling, group counseling, support groups, legal and housing advocacy. We also have art therapy for children of some of the women in the support groups. And we do a lot of outreach to the community, technical assistance to other groups who are looking for expertise in this area, and try to do as much prevention as possible under the circumstances.
Okay, and the circumstances are?
And the circumstances are that, like many human services, we've all been hearing about it, we have been hurt hard by the budget cuts. Probably the most graphic way to bring it home to people is that we were forced to lay off one full-time counselor. That leaves us with a paid staff of 5 employees, and as you've heard, we're very, very busy. We're not able to serve all the women who contact us right now. I think last month in November we were not able to shelter about 45 families and individuals who, in other words, we had to turn them away because we didn't have that capacity. Same goes for other areas of help that we're called upon. So we're having a hard time, and we're working very hard to make up the difference and to avoid further layoffs. In fact, we would like to expand some of our services, but first we have to get back on an even keel and get back up to where we were before.
Okay. So what, I mean, you're probably doing things in your organization to try to raise more money, but what can other people do? How can we help?
Well, we really appreciate the opportunity to be on this show tonight because we have just sent out a direct mail appeal to mostly folks in Somerville and asking for help. One of the things that happened last month was that an anonymous donor offered us a challenge gift. If we can raise $2,000 by December 31st, we will get an additional $1,000. So we're working hard to raise that money, and I hope that people who received the appeal will help us meet that challenge. Actually, some gifts have already come in, and I just can't say enough how all of us at Respond appreciate the help that the community is already just pouring out to us. If people didn't receive the appeal, our address, if I can say it, is Post Office Box 555, and that's Somerville 02143. Or if folks wanted to know how they could help, there are other ways as well besides money. They could give us a call at Respond, which is 623-5900.
Okay. And what else is happening in Somerville related to this subject? Well, there is a very exciting thing happening in Somerville. As you know, we have a Somerville Commission for Women, and the Commission has established a subcommittee on violence against women. And in addition to looking at battering, what we've been talking about tonight, the committee will be looking at all the different aspects of violence against women and trying to do education and community outreach around these issues. And we last month held a very successful event and brought, I think, over 30 women together to brainstorm ideas on this subject. Now we're thinking about doing a local cable TV series, and we hope to get that started off the ground pretty soon. We're also talking about doing a march or a vigil or some kind of commemorative public action in the spring. We also have been working with the police to offer self-defense classes for women. So there's a lot of excitement going on there, and I really want to encourage women who are watching to get involved. It's a perfect avenue to get involved in, any one of the aspects we've been talking about tonight. And the best way to do that, I'd say, you could certainly call us, or you could call Rose Boardman, who is the staff person for the Commission for Women at City Hall, 625-6600. And she would definitely steer folks in the right direction.
Okay.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, there is, as you speak. And the self-defense classes have started, or?
About halfway through?
They're about halfway through now. We're hoping, if there's enough community response out there, that it's something we'd like to do at least yearly. And the department has provided the space and the instructors, and so it's kind of a way for the police department to show the community that we're concerned, we know what's going on out there. So that's our way of trying to help in that sense.
What role, I guess any of you can answer this, when we talk about self-defense, okay, a woman takes a self-defense class, what does that do? I mean, does that make her able to physically defend herself? What does it do?
Well, I'd like to say that for me, from what I've seen, and I have taken some self-defense classes, the most important element for me is the practice in assessing the situation. When you practice seeing where you're at, seeing what the danger is. There are times when the best thing to do would be to scream or to fight. There are other times when maybe you feel that your life would be threatened if you did call out. But I think the benefit of self-defense classes is that you have the support to really sort of work through those issues to the point where you can face a situation perhaps a little more calmly, assess the situation, and do what makes sense at that moment.
I also think that a lot of time is spent not so much on the physical aspect of it, but I know that the instructors are teaching a lot of self-awareness and what's going on in this community, and so that you're not walking down the street with your bag hanging off your arm and not thinking about where you're at, how well lit the street is, what kind of criminal activity goes on in that area. So I think those are important things too that they're discussing, and just to make people aware of what's going on out there.
Okay. I thought it would be nice if each of us could sort of go around, and if you could say anything to a woman who is being battered, what would that be? If each of you, very briefly, and I may have to cut you off, could say.
I would like to say to someone who, thought they were being battered, to just trust yourself and trust your gut instincts, to put the focus on yourself and realize that you need to take care of yourself and you're number one, and to tell somebody about it and break the silence.
I would say basically the same thing. Reach out and make the phone call. If it's not to the police department, make it to Respond. We do a lot of referrals back and forth. We work very closely together. And we would never take the situation out of a woman's hands, would never take that control away. We only go as far as they want us to go.
That's good to know.
And even just to make the call and not identify yourself and describe your circumstances, and you can be given what your options are and what might happen.
When a woman calls us in crisis, one of the first things we say is, "Are you safe right now?" And when we get an answer to that, we say, "How can we help you?" There's help out there. There's a whole network of help out there, and I'd like to just reiterate what others said. Pick up the phone and make the call if you can.
Good. This has been Responsibility in the Face of Violence Against Women. I thank you all for coming here tonight. I would like to mention, I don't know if we're going to have the numbers at the end, but there are also groups that are for men who are themselves batterers. I know Emerge is one group, and I think I've got their number here somewhere.
They're located in
Cambridge on Green Street.
Cambridge on Green Street. And then there's another organization called New Directions for Men. And both of those organizations provide services for men who would, I guess, like to change their behavior, their thoughts and feelings on the situation. Our show will be aired again on Thursday, and when we roll the credits, there'll be numbers that people can write down if they haven't caught them during the show. And I thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.